I'm Felicia Shakiba, and this is CPO Playbook, where we solve a business challenge in every episode. Today, we're solving a challenge that most organizations face, but few address effectively: understanding the real impact of employee experience on business performance. When turnover is high and productivity is unclear, companies often default to engagement surveys. But what if there were a better way to uncover that truly drives results? As the Global Chief People Officer for Tridon Group, Scott Leuchter has implemented a data-driven employee experience impact assessment that doesn't just surface sentiment, it predicts outcomes. Scott, we are so grateful to have you on the show. How are you doing today?
I'm doing great. It's great to be here and good to see you again.
Let's start with context. What was the organizational challenge that led to the decision to do this assessment in the first place?
Yeah. So Ideal Tridon is a global manufacturing company. We make clamps and struts and connectors in the simplest sort of terms. And I was introduced to this company about 3 years ago when I had my prior company. I was doing consulting. And the chief HR officer at that time, she was coming into the organization, and one of the things the CEO had asked her to look at was around engagement, and it was sort of a standard question. And she said, she's been in the field for a long time, and she's not really seen the benefit of engagement specific to outcomes. Her point of view was, look, engagement's been around a long time. We watched every time Gallup put something out. Ironically enough, Gallup just put out their statistics for last year, and global engagement right now is at 21%. It's the lowest it's been, I think, since they've recorded it. And so she was trying to come up with a way, or was asking the question, is there something out there that's maybe different that we could really get some clear insights, and more importantly, link those, or better yet, know what's driving these outcomes? And ironically enough, I had been working on something for a long time, probably 4 or 5 years. I was doing a lot of research on employee engagement, commitment, experience, all the things, because, a couple of years ago, experience really hit the map with guys like Jacob Morgan and others, and it became this really popular thing, but there was no real way to measure it. So it was this great concept and this great understanding, but there was nothing really around it. And so I thought, well, maybe I could come up with something. And so I spent probably 4 or 5 years researching anything and everything, and started to do some interviews and started to talk to people. And because I've been in HR a long time, I was just relying on my own experiences and even asking myself, okay, as an employee, what does an experience mean? What does it look like? What's involved with that? And for those who are or have been married, if you were to ask somebody, hey, tell me about your, being married, you're going to get some sort of answer around it's either positive or it's negative or it's maybe somewhere in the middle. And when you ask somebody, well, why is it that? What you get are all the little things, all the things that are part of an experience. You don't get the big things around the engagement or the wedding or the children, or those are big moments that matter. But it's all this other stuff. So it got me thinking, well, what is that for employees, for people who work? And so I started to do a lot of interviews and just hear and ask people those basic questions. Tell me about your experience at work. Is it positive or neutral or negative? And tell me why. And what started to emerge was a pattern of consistent interactions, or factors or elements of people's experience. And that's really what sort of formulated the instrument. And so when I met with the prior head of HR, I shared with her, hey, we've got this thing. It's reliable and valid. I just tested it. And would you be open to entertaining it? And she thought, yeah, absolutely. And so we conducted that survey and we've provided the results. And it's been really impactful for them because it identifies the overall experience, quantifies that, in a very qualitative and quantitative way. It lasers in as to what exactly is impacting that experience and to what degree. And more importantly, there's a predictive nature of the instrument that allows us to say this particular factor is impacting this business outcome. And for this organization, it was around performance and productivity, intent to stay and intent to recommend. And so they've been using it now for a couple of years. And then when I joined the organization in January, picked it right up. And now we're doing a pulse survey and we're seeing how things have moved since then.
Wow. So how exciting. I can't wait to dive deeper into this assessment. But I want to first understand, why did you choose to approach it from an experience impact angle rather than traditional engagement survey?
Yeah. And, I want to be not careful, but I want to, engagement's been around for a long time. And I think we've all seen the benefit of it. One of the and like anything, there's been some challenges with engagement. There's been a lot of people who have written about some of the implications of using engagement. One of the biggest criticisms of it is that it's not an output measure. Number one, it can't directly predict a particular outcome. You can look at it from a relationship and correlation perspective, and you can look at it and to say, yes, this has some impact on it. But what we were trying to really go for it is there something that we could get very simply that says, does this part of your experience impact this outcome? And it's a very simple, sort of question and answer, which allows us to do more advanced regression type work. And that's, sort of statistically the way you construct the instrument to be able to have those questions that can lead you to do advanced, more analytics and specifically regression work. And so really, I think that's the biggest. It's not to say that engagement isn't useful to do, and I'm not arrogant enough to say that this is the way or the only way or the best way. It's just another way. So I think for organizations who maybe have some apathy or some concern over engagement surveys, and we do this every 2 years, and we're not really seeing a lot of value and benefit, doing something different might be for them.
Yeah. So can you walk us through how the assessment works and what kind of data it collects?
Sure. Yeah. So let me start with just defining kind of how we define what experience is. And so we define it as the sum of perceptions employees have about their interactions in an organization and how they evaluate them. And so when you think about it sort of in a construct view, that's how we define that. And so when we think about what's involved in the assessment, it's pretty simple, maybe a 10-minute survey you can take online via QR code. It's really simple to do. The front part of the survey is some standard demographic questions, which we tailor to depending on what the organization is looking to look at in terms of comparisons in different groups, whether it's race, gender, ethnicity, tenure, etc. So there's a demographic section. And then the instrument starts to ask you about your overall experience. Just pretty straight, what is your overall experience? Is it positive? Is it neutral? Is it negative? And to what percentage? And then there are 18 factors of experience or these interactions that we've identified. These are things like company reputation, the business unit or department I work in, the work being done, like the work I actually do, who I report to, who I work with, where I work, how I work, when I work, resources I'm given, support, pace of work, impact. There's a variety of these things. And we ask people to identify, which of those have an impact overall on your experience? And then which of those have an impact on those 4 business outcomes? The instrument's set up in such a way that a company could say, I'm interested in other outcomes as well, because all we're asking is, does this impact this and to what degree? And so in its simplest terms, it's a very simple exercise, but really impactful when you get to that section. And then there's a series of open-ended questions, probably 4, that revolve around, hey, what are we doing as an organization that we should keep doing that's driving a good experience? What are we doing that's driving a negative experience? What are some recommendations that you would have? And so we have a combination of both qualitative and quantitative data. Also throughout the instrument, at a certain section, participants are asked to rank those elements as to which have the most impact on them. So you're not only getting their ranking, you're getting the relationship from an impact perspective. And then when we start to look at the regression analysis, we're able to identify which of those factors actually predict an outcome. So it's a pretty simple exercise, max 10 minutes, QR codes, link, you can take it on your phone, anything you can access. And that's been really proven to be really, really beneficial for folks, especially in manufacturing, who a lot of our employees don't have computers or terminals. They can just snap the QR code, do it on their phone, and they're done.
We'll be right back. Back to the show. It reminds me of a project we're currently involved with where we're having this, we do the same exact thing. So I feel like we're one, Scott. I mean, our minds think alike. For listeners who aren't familiar with a regression analysis, can you explain why this statistical method added value? So I'm very excited for your response for this because I know what a regression analysis is. And I think people's mind gets blown at this point. So go ahead.
Hello, I'm Ruth Thomas, host of Comp and Coffee, where we break down what's next in the world of compensation management. From pay transparency to performance alignment, we explore how businesses are rethinking compensation to drive impact, equity, and growth. So if you're shaping the future of pay at your organization, grab a cup and tune in. Listen on the Work Defined Podcast Network.
Yeah, and I'll try to simplify it as much as possible for the benefit of the audience. I mean, if we think about most surveys and engagement surveys, a great example, it's a correlation. It's looking at relationship, and that looks at variables, if you will, X and Y, and how they're related. Is it positive from a statistical perspective, or is it negative? And that can, and one of the great examples I use, I learned this in statistics, and I remember my professor said, show of hands, how many people in the room do you think smoking causes cancer? And every hand went up. And so, but statistically, there is no way to measure, does smoking actually cause cancer? It's positively related to cancer, but it's not causal. So regression analysis looks at causation, and that's one of the statistical methods you can use. And there are multiple ways. There's linear, multiple linear, logistic, and that's all a function of the questions and the variables themselves. So it's looking at the relationship between variable A and variable B and its impact on the variable, so to speak. And so, for example, we have those 18 independent variables, if you will, with 4 dependent variables, which is performance and productivity, et cetera. And so we're able to look at the relationship both correlationally as well as causally vis-a-vis regression analysis. And logistic regression is really a function of the sort of the binary nature of questions. So for example, does X impact Y? It's a yes, no. And by virtue of asking it that way, you're able to draw that statistical relationship. So at its core, it's really the difference between is something related to something or does something cause something?
Yes, it is predictive
Yeah.
and it allows people to truly understand what to prioritize, where to put their time, where to invest their money, and into what type of experience, right? So you had factors that surfaced in this assessment. Could you tell us what those factors were and maybe what was the most correlated to either success or predictive that which you found?
Yeah, so we did 3 predictors, if you will, or 3 predictive calculations. One is what's predictive of overall employee experience. So once we have the employee experience overall score, we can create a scale and we create a variable for it, and then we can look at all the other factors against that particular outcome. And so when we looked at the data, what was most predictive of overall employee experience was factor totality of your work. This is all the stuff you do in your job, which may or may not be what your job really is. So it's looking at all the stuff you do in a role. Here at this organization, that was one of the predictor factors. How you received feedback was also a predictor of overall employee experience. The opportunities that were available to the workforce at that time, and then support they were provided. And that support could be anything from tools, technology, resources, the stuff you need to do your job. So those were the factors that were predictive of overall employee experience. Then when we looked at predictors that were predictive of outcomes, pace of work was a predictor of business outcomes, and that was specific around productivity. How you receive feedback was specific around performance. How you're recognized, that was one also. And then support and how you're rewarded. So similar but different. And so to your point you mentioned a minute ago, now you're getting much more targeted as to where to go focus, which I think is one of the challenges with engagement surveys in general. It sort of gives you a direction, but not specificity in some cases. And then we also layered that against what were the top 5 voted elements of experience. And so at the scoreboard level, we know exactly which of those elements are predictive and overlap. And so therefore, what this organization did a few years ago is they took that data and we broke it up by the plant, the distribution center, and then corporate. And they started meeting every month vis-a-vis focus groups. They pulled together focus groups and said, here's the data. Here's what you told us. What are we going to do about these based on those factors? And they met for over a year and are continuing to even meet currently because of that data. So it was very specific and allowed them, us, to really get lasered on focus on these things because these will move the needle on outcomes.
Wow. How exciting. I don't know about you, but I nerd out on stuff like this.
Yeah.
I mean, it's just like having, the magic at your fingertips to truly understand what you need to do. So I heard feedback was a big piece. I heard incentivization and probably aligning your goals with the right incentives, I assume is probably a part of that, right?
Yeah. So if we think about, I'm just looking at where they landed. The factors that predicted performance were specifically around reward. So that factor, that outcome of performance, their individual performance, how they were rewarded directly impacted and predicted that outcome. Productivity was around pace of work and the feedback they received. Intent to stay, feedback was the main predictor. Intent to recommend, feedback. So feedback was consistent through 3 of the 4 predictors of business outcomes, those outcomes. And then support landed in 2. So when you even look at it at that level, if I were here at the time, I would have said, okay, let's look at how we're rewarding people. What's that overall program? Let's look at feedback and performance. How are we doing it? Are we doing it?
Right.
And then support. What do they need to do their job well? So at simplest, pay them accordingly, give them feedback consistently in a meaningful way, and give them what they need to do their job, and we're going to have our business outcomes.
I think one thing that is always on my mind when it comes to feedback is how managers are good arbiters of day-to-day fairness. This kind of factor came out of a McKinsey article, a few years back, and I just thought, gosh, that is just so core, right? Because feedback can be given in various different ways. Criticism, recognition. It could be once a month. It could be twice a month. It could be for 1 hour. It could be for 30 minutes. But you know what I've also noticed in a lot of organizations that I've worked with is that a lot of times I'll ask this question of managers and I'll say, do you ever have one-on-ones with your people, with the people that you manage? And sometimes they'll reply with, well, I see them every day. And I said, well,
yeah.
That's not really a one-on-one. That's not, I know you talk to them every day, but a one-on-one is just something special, right? It's just a chance for managers and for individuals to truly understand what they're progressing, where they're not progressing, how manager can unblock them and where to guide them. And also to make sure that the feedback they're giving each of their different people that they're managing is fair. And that fairness, that perception of fairness is so critical and important. And so the quality and the quantity of the feedback, I think you could get various different, responses in regards to how an organization is performing based on how that feedback is like being delivered, right?
Yeah,
I've seen it in multiple areas.
Yeah, and that came up a lot in the open-ended. So as I mentioned, the assessment also looks at, what should we stop doing that's really impacting experience? What should we continue to do? What would you recommend? And feedback, even at the qualitative sort of open text level, was a really significant theme and factor that came through. And so that's one of the things that they had worked on post that survey. And so, for example, they implemented performance management last year. We implemented performance management. And so now we're looking at to say, okay, is this meaningful? Is this just performance management for performance sake? Or is it, okay, we meet quarterly for a formal, we meet monthly for a one-on-one. What's the one-on-one? Should it be to review how you're doing, goals, objectives? So we're trying to really, as you said, it's a lot like parenting, right? It's really, do you care to spend the time with the people that you're responsible for in your remit? And are there programmatic elements to it, as well as sort of, as you said, it's not just talking day to day. It's actually sitting down and saying, hey, how are you doing? Let's look at your goals for the for the quarter? Are you on track? Are you off track? Let's talk about that. And it's not punitive. It's meant to be additive. It's meant to be engaging so that person can leave knowing, okay, I know what I'm doing. I know I'm on track, or I may be off track, but here's some things I'm working on. Because in the absence of that, there's always the inevitable surprise. Here's my rating. We didn't talk about it. That has a significant impact on experience. And I've done this assessment with 4 other organizations, and I would say feedback is a pretty consistent predictor in organizations. I can't say that would be true for every organization, but if we assume that that's the case, that it really puts the emphasis on frontline leaders and managers to be actively engaged with your people.
Leading up to this assessment, what kind of change management or preparation did the company need to do before launching the survey? Because I feel like that's also a big piece of the puzzle.
Yeah, and that's one of the reasons why they chose to do this in the first place, is they had never taken any sort of pulse or any feedback from the company. And the company's been around for over 100 years. They had never asked employees, whether it was engagement, satisfaction, or any other version. And so this was significant. No one's ever asked people to share how they felt here. And so, there was a lot of conversations they had to have. The prior head of HR had to meet with multiple teams to explain to them, hey, here's why we're asking, because we care. We really want to know. We really want to understand. We're not trying to identify someone. And, there was a lot of concern about self-identifying in terms of a certain category, and could you find out my answers? And of course, the survey is anonymous and confidential. There's no way for me or anyone else to know who said what. So there was a lot of conversations they had to have at the individual level, small group level, focus group level to explain intent, number one, and the use of it. And so I think once people got comfortable with, okay, you're asking because you care, which happens to be one of our core values. You're asking because you care. There's no way you're going to find out it's me, so to speak. And you've already got a plan for what you're going to do vis-a-vis these focus groups and how we're going to use that. People got much more comfortable, but there was still a lot of skepticism. And even right now in the middle of our pulse survey, our feedback results are not as high as I would have liked them, and not as high as they were when they did this a couple of years ago. And so that's an interesting, as a psychologist, it makes me think, well, that's interesting. Why were they more open to it a couple of years ago and reluctant now? Something's going on to where, back to the supervisor or manager, my hypothesis is there's something that's happening there. So, but yes, a lot of change management. We're having to do that now and explain and re-explain and just let people know intent and use. And that's been a challenge for sure.
Yeah, I think the communication strategy before and after is really a big part of ensuring that, people are taking and participating in the assessment. I always tell people that when you have those individuals, or if you don't have 100%, if you think about the leftover of people who didn't take the survey, there's only a few reasons why they didn't take it. So it's either because they're afraid of repercussions and leadership has given them that, idea that there might be some repercussions. It could be that people don't think anything's going to change.
Right.
And none of those things are good signs. So it's always super important for leadership to ensure that they have good communication prior, follow up after, and during, the time of people taking the assessment, that encouragement, that continuous encouragement, that their voice is important and should be heard is really important too.
I also think not thinking of it as a program or a thing we're doing right now, which I think might be a little bit what's happening here, because it's been some time since the first one was done. So it feels episodic. It feels like something's happening, as opposed to, hey, this is something we're going to do on a frequent basis. I think that helps as well. But coming back to one of the things that I also forgot to mention is one of the other factors that has come through pretty consistently, not only here, but with other organizations, is who people work with. That the team they're in, the people they interact with every day. That could be coworkers, it could be customers, suppliers. That community idea has a really strong impact on people's experience. This kind of likens itself to psych-cap and psychological safety and some of those other kind of constructs, but it's that idea of community comes through pretty strongly as well.
We'll be right back. Back to the show. I wanted to bring this up again because I know you covered it before, but I wanted to dig in and just make sure we covered how the outcomes, what were the specific outcomes, and how do they really link to turnover or productivity?
Mm-hmm. So the four outcomes that we measured here were performance, and that's basically, if you think about it, you're taking the survey and you're answering your question around, does this impact my performance, right? That's kind of what you do every day. Productivity is, of course, kind of what you produce, if you will. What's the output of your work? So performance is what you do and how you do it. Productivity is sort of the outcome of that. Your intent to stay, and it's the question specific around intent to stay with the organization for the next 12 months. So it's very bracketed, so we could be clear around sort of that. And then intent to recommend, which is asking around, would you recommend this to friends, family, people in your professional colleagues? Would you recommend coming to work here? Now, you could change those. So for example, I had a client before ask me about maybe safety as an outcome. Would that be something? And again, you could put whatever outcome you want, because we're looking at relationship impact. We're looking at, does this impact this? And those were the four. And so when they did this a few years ago, the impact of employee experience on performance was 74% positive. Yes, that does impact my overall experience, does impact my performance at 74%. Productivity was the same. Intent to stay was 89, and intent to recommend was 92. So the question was, does your experience impact these four, and to what degree? And so it was pretty significant. And then when you layer on where they stack ranked those experiences against those four that we mentioned earlier, and then the third level is clearly the regression analysis to look at the predictor. Then you know exactly where to go spend your time, which is what they did.
Yeah, I love that. Can you share what surprised you most, either in the results or during the implementation?
The result that surprises me the most in general is the reputation of the company. Because if you think about the other factors are much more tangible, meaning it happens to you, you experience it real, like who I work with, where I work, how I work, policies, you can feel that. The reputation of the company is kind of out here. It's not really happening to you, but it's there and it's a factor. And so I've seen consistently that the, for lack of a better term, the jersey and logo you wear matters, and it matters in their experience and how people perceive their experience. And certainly, I think in some industries it might even be more. So, for example, potentially in healthcare and technology and some of these other industries where that matters. So that was surprising. Number one. I think the other thing that's surprising is the feedback we get after the survey, which was, I wasn't sure what this was going in. It was really simple and easy to take it. And I didn't feel that the trepidation I had going into it, I didn't have afterwards, because it's almost like having a conversation with a colleague or a friend about, what's it like to work here? Is it positive? What's impacting it? Tell us about it. And so I think people really, that have felt comfortable now that they've gone through it, which is interesting why we're having some challenges with the pulse survey. But I think the other point you mentioned, which is the big learning, was around the change management, the communication, the before, the during, the after, and being consistent with that, and then leveraging it as, this is just how we're going to do business going forward. This is a part of our operating cadence. It's part of our operating plan and our rhythm. I think those are some significant lessons learned. And I think just the acuteness of the instrument, if you will, to know where to go focus. As a practitioner, I always left with, gosh, where do I go? What do I do? And you do the action planning and you do all this stuff, and then it sort of dissipates because it's a little bit out here, whereas this is very finite and specific. And it's even at the face validity level, it just seems to make a lot of sense. Like, of course, these are the things that impact experience. Why didn't you ask me about it before?
A lot of leaders I know are very scared to ask about topics like compensation or manager performance. How does the method that you've used mitigate that fear?
Yeah, so within the instrument itself, when we ask someone to say, does this impact this? We define what that is. So for example, the question might be, does the reputation of the company impact your experience? It says it underneath there. Reputation is defined as employees' perceptions about other, so it's very clear what it is. And so when you get to the reward and recognition, which are two separate factors, if you will, recognition is that intangible acknowledgement of your work. Hey, you're doing a great job. Thank you. I appreciate that. There might be something more formal. Reward is specific around compensation, bonuses, raises, incentives. What you also notice is that we're not asking about your supervisor. We don't ask your manager. We're not trying to find the person or the people, or it's actually who you report to, which could be skip level, direct, manager, etc. And so, and that what it allows us to do is to say, gosh, we've got a supervisor manager problem. It's not this specific supervisor or manager, which some of the engagement surveys will actually give you a report that says, hey, Scott, here's your people, what they think. Useful to a certain degree, but also broadly speaking, let's look at what do we have to do systemically. Does that mean we have to develop leadership programs? Like, it's more at the strategic view as opposed to a sort of a finite view. And so because we ask reward in a general sense and recognition in a more general sense, we found that comes through very loud and clear. And then on the open-endeds, we certainly get the specificity around those things. People have been very vocal about what they say and how they say it. And we report the results as is. There's no, spell checking and anything. It's exactly what they said in their own words. So that way, when the leaders are reading through it, they're pretty taken aback by how open people are and how specific they are about some of these things. Yeah.
Well, Scott, this has been one of my favorite episodes to talk about because this is just where I live. Mentally, I'm constantly thinking about these factors and the quantitative data and the qualitative data. And I know companies are doing their best to do this more often, right? Yeah. To really put quantitative data back into decision making, and it's difficult when leaders have been using their gut and shooting from the hip for years. It's just a different muscle, but I think it's definitely where a lot of companies are moving, especially in this era of AI, and where qualitative data can be interchangeable with quantitative very easily. Thank you so much for sharing your insights, and I just can't wait to learn more about what you're doing.
Yeah, thanks so much. It's great to see you, and thanks for having me on.
Our pleasure. If today's episode captured your interest, please consider sharing it with a friend and leaving a review. To learn more about how CPO Playbook can support you or a leader you know with executive coaching or organizational transformation, visit us at cpoplaybook.com. Your support as a subscriber means the world to us, so thank you for tuning in. I'm Felicia Shakiba. Let's connect on LinkedIn.